Welcome back for season 3 of Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I was an assistant director in Hollywood for the better part of 8 years, and now I'm not. Today, we're talking about Mad Men, the TV series that aired on AMC for 7 seasons between 2007 and 2015. The show is set in an advertising agency in the 1960s and follows both the professional and personal lives of the characters. Hijinks ensue. At Rotten Tomatoes, the average season tomato meter is 94%, and the critics' consensus for season 1 reads, oozing evocative early 1960s ambiance, Mad Men is a sly, subversive look at the American workplace that radiates class, wit, and an undercurrent of disaffection. Of course, here on Below the Line, we don't care what the critics thought. My guest today will tell us more about what happened behind the scenes. First, Adam Ben Frank, you started as the second assistant director in season 1, became one of the first ADs in season 3.
That's correct.
Well, Adam, you and I did some work together back in the days on West Wing. You've clearly stayed busy since then. What are you working on now?
Now I'm the co-producer UPM on Goliath season 4.
Welcome to the show, Adam. Glad you could join us.
Thanks.
Next, we're joined by Eric Carpenter, who was a PA on season 2, came back to the show as the second AD in season 5, was promoted to the key second AD in season 7. Eric, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Eric, that's the definition of climbing the ladder. What was that like for you going back and forth with the show?
It was exciting. And when I left as a PA, I said I was not going to miss my opportunity to AD on the show. And I was trying to get all my days and time so that I could come back and be an AD before the show went off the air.
Well, we're both glad you had the chance to do that, and glad that you can tell us about it here. Finally, in our fourth chair today is Lana Horachowski, who started with the makeup team in season 1. Lana, then you left for season 2, but returned as the department head in season 3, as I understand it. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Lana, what are you working on now?
Right now, I'm doing Penny Dreadful, the City of Angels, the new, I guess, the new chapter of Penny Dreadful.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that. In fact, I think I know some other crew working on that, and
really?
you guys will come back when it airs, and we'll talk about it some more.
All right.
Well, let's turn our attention back to Mad Men. First, for some context, the show is set in New York City, and the pilot was filmed there, but regular filming took place in LA, and I don't think any of you worked on the pilot, but I'm curious to find out how much of the crew carried over.
I think there was about 6 people. Matt Weiner, Scott Hornbacher, the line producer, Marcy Patterson, Jen Getzinger, who was the script supervisor rather, and she came over, and Phil Abraham, who DP'd the first 6 episodes, including the pilot, and then started directing, and Alan Taylor, who directed the pilot, directed first season as well.
Oh, I see. And when you mentioned Matt Weiner, for those who don't know, is the creator and executive producer of the show. We'll be talking more about him as we go. But let's tell me more about what the filming was like in LA. Is it correct that you guys were at LA Center Studios?
Mm-hmm.
So, Eric, you guys must have taken that place over. A couple of stages, like what sort of footprint did you guys have?
We had 4 of the stages, right?
I think at first we had 3.
Yeah. And in the last season, we had, after they moved offices, then we got that stage 6, right? That last one.
And that there was that half a stage down on the stage
right.
7 or whatever. We all hated shooting in.
It was literally like a closet, and we set the sprinklers off one time.
Tell us more about that. What do you mean you set the sprinklers off while filming?
That was sort of a swing stage. So season 1, one entire stage was the office. And then there were some other offices. The way we would do that is put up flats against the offices we already had on the main set and redress the office so it would look like we were on a different floor. And on another set was the Draper home and the bedrooms, because they were on the second floor, so they had to be built separately. And then we had a third swing set stage, and then season 2 we started getting a lot bigger, and then we took over this, they called it stage 7, which they rented to commercials because it was really small and it did not have high ceilings. So like the hospital that Peggy was in when she gave birth was in there. A couple of like the flashback sets.
Wasn't the kitchen too in there? Was that the first time that It was when she got remarried. And the kitchen set,
yeah.
wasn't that in there to start
Yeah.
too?
That was,
And then they
that was
moved it up to
season 3.
stage, the third stage we got up top when we got expanded.
So I think when we got the 4th stage.
Yeah.
But tell me again, so setting off the sprinklers, just the lights were too hot, or you
Yeah,
literally set something on fire?
The ceilings were too low, so the heat generated from the lights set off the sprinklers.
That must have made for a fun note on the production report.
Yeah, and also to scramble to see what we're going to do next.
Well, what about when you guys were shooting exteriors? I don't recall there being tons of exteriors, but I shot them around LA to look like New York, or out in the neighborhoods for some of the, like the Draper home. Where did that get done?
The Draper home was in Pasadena until they got divorced and sold that home. We used LA Center as the exterior of Sterling Cooper because it was a period building. I think it was built in 59. And whenever we did exteriors, we were very controlled about them because we didn't have hundreds of cars and hundreds of extras, because it was essentially like a low budget show the first couple of seasons. It didn't really get popular until season 3. And, that's when Above the Line became a little heavy, and they gave us a little bit more money, but not much.
Well, I want to talk more about that as well, but let's dive a little deeper on the challenges of filming a period piece with a limited budget. Start where you like. Lana, why don't you tell us a little bit about just the hair and makeup of the 1960s and trying to get that right?
We tried to, as much as we could, use like products that were around back then, just because, there were some like shades of like Revlon or like Estee, like lines that had been around still had like colors that had been, used back then. So once the show got more popular, like they were like totally willing to just give us anything. But at first it was just like trying to use like old fashioned makeup, like, you can buy like inexpensive makeup at the makeup stores that's been around forever, like, old, like just like makeup artist brand, like not no name brands, but they had like, colors that have been around since like the 20s. So then we just like find old makeup ads. Was really like the best research for me, because Matt wanted us to stay away from people looking too Hollywood or too like, because it's like all the research you have is either black and white or, it's been colored, or, like it's just what you see in movies, which is all, professionally done. So in order to keep them sort of looking like regular people, I guess like we really looked at like the makeup ads at the time, but maybe like a year ahead. So it's like if we were like in 1960, I would look at like 58, makeup ads and, figure like these are what people would be buying, the colors that were available. That's what people would be buying at the time. And so kind of that's what we used as a reference. And then just really like, it was all broken down by character. Like Peggy was always, pretty plain until all of a sudden she was like trying hard. And then she would be like, maybe she would go buy like the one period color and she would put it on. But the challenges, at the beginning were trying to find like foundation that was like more matte and pancake, because nobody now is wearing that. So we just kind of had to stick with old fashioned products, to make it look authentic, as authentic as possible.
Was it expensive to find older products? You said in later seasons they were giving it to you.
Yeah, later seasons they were giving it. Plus, like, again, as the show gained popularity, like the reds and the hot pinks and the corals sort of made a comeback, maybe influenced by the show. I don't know, but like those colors weren't super popular when we started. Like the mattes, everything was pretty glossy and shiny, and that wasn't being done then. So like once the show's gaining, like in trend wise, we were starting to get more mattes and those sort of pigments, so they were a lot easier to find. But no, actually, when you're using like no name products, they're actually like less expensive than like the Chanel red or the name brands. But like as the show got more popular and we got fancier, we got more money, and we got
a little more access to
things. Yeah. And then like people were wanting to do like a Mad Men line and a this. So then we were rolling in product.
Adam, Eric, what about just being on set, between sets and props? And again, these things are common. You mentioned like having a limited number of cars if you are shooting exteriors. These are all big budget items, right? To make it look like it's not just a specific thing, but frankly, part of the background.
Yeah, this is the first place at work where I learned about blocking vehicles. We'd always bring in a giant period bus to block off the majority of the street you could see in the background, which would limit what you could see. But we had a core group of car owners that we would call and bring in, and you'd just give them a period shirt and they'd dress from the waist up, and they'd be your driving cars on the street whenever you needed them. And it was pretty much the same people every time.
Yeah, if you really look inside the cars, you can see they're all like 50 plus. Every single one of them.
Car collectors.
We're begging them to shave, begging them to please shave, because you can't have that silhouette of like all that facial hair and the long hair.
Because the Gledgesmen would come and drive their own cars, and so but they're obviously going to be the ones that drive it, but they also have to look period themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some of them looked really good, and those were the ones we would put closer. Some of them were just used to be parked,
and then they could spend the day. They could spend the day at craft service then if they needed to.
Yeah, I was just going to say they would bring their little chairs and be set up like the whole group of them, because we'd usually have 10 to 15 at the most. It was like its own little bleacher section, like the hair and makeup department on our show, because not only did all the principals have to go through hair, makeup, and costumes, but so did all the extras. So early on in prep, I remember when they first started, they did not have a separate, I'll call it base camp for background. They were just going to do it like every other show. And then they quickly realized we need a wardrobe trailer for background. We need a hair and makeup trailer for background. And they needed basically their own team. So there were 3 hair and makeup for principals and cast. And then there was 3 hair and makeups for background. And when they all sat together on the stage, the producer would always, as we get towards the end of the day, would say, any way we can wrap some of the bleacher section?
Lan, when you said you started first season as part of the team, were you with the principals or were you with that background
I was
team?
I was with the principals. The first season I was there, I did Christina Hendricks and John Slattery. And honestly, pretty much everyone else.
as it rolls through.
And just, props on the show, since you brought that up, that was always our first meeting in prep, because everything had to be made. That's the thing about that show. Prep was very important because everything had to be made. Every actor had to every male actor had to have their hair cut, including some females. We had to pick them because certain blondes, all that color in some people's hair, streaks and all of that didn't exist. So if a background had that, we had to not cast them, or they had to have, do their hair properly in order to work on our show at their own expense. And some people did. So we would always have the prop meeting first to give them a lead time to build all that stuff. There was no, let's rush call in an extra because we're down a person. We couldn't do that because that person that was picked was already had their hair cut, already fit into a costume. And the same thing with props. There was no like, all right, let's give this guy a newspaper. 2 reasons. 1, it had to be period. And 2, every script had a date to it. This script takes place January 3rd, 1960 to January 12th, and all the papers on the set, all the magazines on the set in people's homes, they had to be correct in that time period. Matt would check.
He did check.
Well, and I've read that Matt had, say, a very precise eye for what he wanted on set, from props to newspapers to, as you mentioned, the makeup. Talk some about that kind of involvement. Like, what sort of detail was the executive producer bringing to each and every prop, basically?
Well, there was not ever one actor that walked onto set to shoot that did not go through a hair and makeup test. So we were constantly, like, even if they had one line, even if it was like a featured background that we were going to like really see, they would come in, we would fully do them, put them in costume, and we would put them on, we would take pictures, or we would take them up to Matt's office, and and we would do it until we got it right. Because it never, which actually it seems like a lot more work, but at the end of the day, it was like so great, because by the time they would come in to get ready, it's like we already knew what we were doing. There was already a picture ready to go. Anybody could have done them, and it was already approved. And it really does make the process a lot faster when you have that many people to get ready.
Yeah, that goes to the prep of it. Once the train left the station, there wasn't, there was a little bit of prep to do, as Eric could attest, and I, because we were both seconds, with fitting people. Like you couldn't fit everybody in prep. You basically did the first few days. And then that process continued. That's why we had rotating keys. And hair and makeups for the principals, you tried to get as many as you could that came to the read-through, which was everybody came to the read-through. But you would do as many as the hair and makeup people could. And then sometimes they would come in the day or two before they worked. You know, the show really had a rhythm with prep that I honestly fight to do on other shows. Unlike other shows, we always had our scripts day one. And if we didn't have a script, we had as much as he could have write. And then in our concept meeting, he would tell us what each scene was going to be. And we'd have a concept meeting draft. And then 3 or 4 days into prep, we'd have our tone meeting. And then after that, we'd have the tone meeting draft. And then after we found locations and started casting people, he'd release a pre-production draft, maybe 2 days after that. And then the last day of prep was always the read-through, the production meeting in the morning, and the read-through at lunch. And right before that last day, we'd get our white copy. And after the read-through, Matt would take the writers upstairs with the director. They'd go through the script again, and then we'd had a blue version come out. Very rarely did we have like a pink or a yellow or green. It was never like the colored scripts you see on every other show. They would beat the outlines down because Matt would say, the key to a good script is a great outline. I remember him saying that. And they would beat it down. There'd be like 12, 13, 14, 15 versions of an outline. And then by the time they got to the script and after prep, it pretty much held. It held, rather.
Yeah, when you talk about the colored pages, obviously we get them as the new pages. Each set gets a new color on the rainbow. You can end up with some particularly colorful scripts that people are carrying around. But keeping it tight to just third version, that is pretty impressive. Adam, something else you mentioned about rotating keys. Could you and/or Eric say a little bit more about that? Because what's different on this show than from others?
Well, I think it's like Adam said, it's the background and the cast take up a lot of time with getting pictures. We picture picked a lot of the extras, that more so than I think I've done on any other job. And we interviewed a lot of the extras as well. Because if you have, someone that's interacting with one of the principals in a group setting, even a waiter that has to hit a cue and come in and drop off a drink. I mean, you want to bring these people in to make sure that they're not going to stumble over their feet and, drop a drink on the table and screw up a take or something like that. And just in general, be able to interact and not let the moment be too big. So a lot of interviewing, a lot of picking background off of pictures, hair makeup tests, as Lana said, and the nature of the prep with the scouting as well. I mean, an art department having to keep, because it's the nature of the period show and how accurate we were historically and how Matt was involved and wanted it to be as perfect as it could be. If any little thing changed, you had to talk to every department, let them know. On scouts, you had to know which way you're looking. You can only look this way. Which way are we dressing the set? It's just, the work it's a lot bigger and the scripts were meaty. So aside from a show, where you're shooting a 5-day episode and you have 4 days on stage and 2 days of background, we were what were we? We were like 8 days, I think, with a double up day.
Season 1, 2, and 3, we were 7 days with a double up.
7 with a double up, yeah.
And then
Let me clarify. A double up meaning you're trying to get basically a half day for 2 different episodes? Was that the idea? Or what do you mean?
Day 8 of episode 1, we would start day 1 of episode 2. So we'd have 2 crews working, one to finish. Basically, a second crew was brought in to finish day 8 of episode 1, and the DP and the regular crew started day 1 with episode 2 on that same day.
Everybody except us, because we always had to be on one, and we would always have to be on both units.
Because the hair and makeup has to stick with the folks no matter what set they're on.
Right.
They would bring in more people to help cover the sets, so that the main people that worked every day would basically be in the paint shop, or that's what I call the makeup trailer, to get all the actors ready. And they would have people that would stay on set to maintain them while they got everyone ready for 2 episodes of television.
And so
Those
basically,
were the most fun days.
oh yeah,
And
it sounds like a lot
so-
of fun.
Here's what happened on season 4. I was the first AD, and Matt was the master at writing like these really dense scenes that were really 3 scenes in one. And because you're at a party and it's 3 separate conversations happening, you have to cover each of these people talking as if it was just a scene. And one day we got through 2 scenes out of the 5 we had to do, and there was no way we were going to finish. And I have this picture of Nina and I sitting together with our computers and Scott behind us trying to figure out how we're going to do this. And we ended up that season going to 8 dedicated days per episode, because on the 7th day, doing a double up, you can't schedule the way you would. You have to schedule to make certain, to not be on a certain stage or not, and also to not be on location. We both had to be at LA Center. So it sort of locks your schedule in a little bit. And what we realized, if we can free it up and just schedule 8 days the way we need to, it became more efficient. And so seasons 4 and 5 turned into 8 dedicated days. Season 6, we started doing the 9th double up day when needed. And then season 7, we became 9 days with a double up 10th when needed. Because the shows got so dense. And season 7, Don Draper took a road trip. We had to be in a lot of different locations. We couldn't do that with our, with the amount of scenes we had to shoot per episode. They were very meaty scripts. I'd be on page 22 and there was already 35 scenes.
I want us to dive more particularly into the final season, not just about what was involved in the logistics, but how all of that came together. But going back to the general point, so from the beginning, they knew the show was going to be complicated. While a show will normally have 2 first ADs, one prepping while one shoots, from the beginning, you guys had 2 key seconds as well.
Yes. Well, because I was the second hired. When they started, they were going to do this with 1 key. And then they realized in prep very early on, they needed 2 keys. They needed the second base cam for the background. They realized that, and that's when Nina Jack gave me a call, and I was hired as the key.
I see.
It's really amazing they figured that out. I mean, that could have started season 1 off on such a sour note had they not realized, especially with the trailer for the background, the makeup trailer and costumes, and having another key. Like that was a really good critical decision made early on. I think that helped production immensely.
Part of that was Scott, because he was from New York, and in New York, 9 out of 10 shows have rotating keys. And he figured that we need to do this New York way, not LA way. When I first came out here from New York and I was the only key on West Wing, I was like, this is crazy.
It's not the cheap way.
Right.
And do you think there's the day overlap? I don't see that, to your point, it's much more complicated to do the logistics. Of course, you shrink the overall schedule by a day an episode, but you're still spending a ton of money to bring in new folks and stuff. I mean, would you think that's a budget consideration as well, to do that with the overlapping days?
It's half the cost of a regular day, because you're sharing equipment, you're sharing crew, and you're sharing the rented stage that's already paid for by the other episode.
Now, in general, as you mentioned, the seasons grow. You are getting more money. The show's doing well. Lana, to your point earlier, they're actually making and releasing the makeup that you want to use and giving it to the show. But at the same time, you also alluded to the fact the episodes are getting more and more complicated. Was that the sense? Like, what is it getting easier or harder on balance as you go season to season?
If you watch season one, it was mostly inside the office at Sterling Cooper. Season 2, we started going a little bit more into the Draper home and to other characters' homes. And then season 3, where, that's the season everything happened. It got really big. That's when he really opened up the world, going to all of these characters' lives, and Roger's wedding and the British coming and the lawnmower episode. Like every episode that had a party and multiple actors all at once, I sort of fell on me. Nina got the blackface episode. That was it. Every other party fell on me, and it continued. You remember, Eric, like when you were my second, we got all of these
Zuby,
parties.
Zuby, Zoo.
Yeah, Zuby, Zuby, Zoo.
Hawaii.
It was, yeah, Hawaii. That was great.
You know, I want to talk more about Hawaii because season 6 premiere opens up with Hawaii. That's a pretty big undertaking. There's always quite a little sense of boondoggle when a cast goes to Hawaii at some later episode in a series. I'm curious about how this came together for Mad Men.
Adam.
No, Eric, I heard it was your idea, the whole thing that you pitched it. So
Yeah.
Honestly, what I heard was Matt went on vacation there a couple seasons before, and he stayed at one of the only period hotels left there, the pink one, the one we shot at, and he liked it, and he wrote it into an episode. And it was a fight with the studio to actually go. They wanted us to fake it, and we didn't fake anything. Our motto on that show was we either do it right or we don't do it at all. And we knew our limitations. That's why we would do things so correctly. We wouldn't try to see all the way down the block. We would do what we could do really well. Like when Don walking out of the New York Athletic Club, it was like very limited shot, but you had cars going by and they were literally doing rounders to make it look like traffic. And we had our extras in front. And when we did our coverage, we shot into buildings. So it felt real and natural. We knew our limitations, and that's why we can be very efficient. We would go on scouts and we would do DGA theater, and we would sit the people where the scenes were, where they were scripted, because the script was called the instructions. That was coined by Phil Abraham because it was so clearly specified what we see, what you start on, who speaks, they light up during this, they take a sip during that. Everything was scripted, where they sat down, where they stood up. And so we could actually photograph ourselves on scouts and show the angles. Matt would approve them. And then if we only saw 3/4 of the room when you show up on the day, that's all that was dressed. We didn't just dress a 360 set and in case we want to do something else when we got there. Everything was very precisely planned so that everything went onto the screen, every dollar.
Going back to Hawaii, Adam called me that was season 6, right?
Yeah.
He called me at the beginning before we started. He said, okay, so we'd love to have you back. Come back and be the second again. I said, okay, great. He goes, we're going to Hawaii for the first 2 episodes, a combination of, filming for the first 2 episodes or the first episode. But I don't think you can come. So you're going to start, a couple weeks late. And I was like, oh no, everyone's going to Hawaii. Yeah, we're going to hire a local second out there. And I was so bumming. And then finally they decided to bring me, and they actually sent me out early, and I got to do all the background fittings. And
that's why they got you to go, because it was very secretive, the show, but we also kept everything in the family. We brought the entire crew out there with the exception of the lower Teamsters and the grips and electrics below the best boy, because they were rigging the stages on the set because we started in Hawaii that season. Everyone else on the crew came, including PAs.
Yeah.
Because they just wanted, A, for it to be secret, and B, Matt didn't trust anybody else. He trusted us. And since basically by season 6, 90% of the crew is still the same. And Eric, the way to get you was like, okay, well, who's going to do all these fittings? We're going to hire some local person that doesn't know us. And that's how Eric got to go out for 2 weeks before and use it as a vacation as well.
A working vacation, admittedly, much as the show is selling Don Draper's visit to Hawaii as well, right? That's part of his scripted. He's out there to actually visit the hotel for a marketing campaign, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was there. Everything that looks like it was in Hawaii, we were there. The luau, the beach. And we would have to, we brought all these extras and we controlled as much as we could. And anything that was really deep and blurry, we just let go. It's just the way we did things. It was, that was what was so great about that show. It was hard. It was challenging. But we thought about it. We talked about it ad nauseum and executed really well, like a fine meal.
Yeah, I mean, there was like a definite shorthand with our crew and like the producers, and I honestly, and even the cast, and I honestly think that's why like so many of us are still friends and like so close still, and because I think we worked together literally in a way where it was like we just had to learn a way to communicate to get these things done, and like it just
14 was the new 12 on that show. That was our saying. We worked 14 hours every day. So we were with each other more than we were with our families. And it was just because of the amount of work we did. And we did everything correctly, even if it took us a long time. And that's why that show looks the way it does. If you look on the sets, even those letters that were on the secretary's desks, all the stamps were canceled. Because if Matt went there and saw something, you would get called out. So everyone on the crew played at their A level. Everyone played with their A game. And so no other department wanted to upset Matt. It wasn't a competition. We all helped each other out. It just was a great assemblance of a bunch of people that wanted to help Matt execute his vision. No one had their own agenda. No one was trying to make themselves seem more important than they were. He really assembled everyone that really our goal was to make a great episode of television. We were all proud of what we were doing.
I really think he made each and every one of us, like from the top, like from department heads to cast to everyone, like he just made us all so much better at our job.
I agree with that.
We've all gone on to do other shows, and it's like, you know, when we all get together and talk, we're like, oh, and then I pitch it, we should do it this way. And they're like, oh, we don't need to worry about that. They're never going to see, nobody's going to know. Like, we're always thinking about props, and we're all thinking about each other's departments because that's how we learn.
Even when we scheduled the show, when I'd have my hair and makeup meeting, we would have, you know, the Don Draper beard schedule, because I would know, like, at what time of day, if it's 6 o'clock in the story, he was so precise with what hour every scene took place, what day, so that I would know at 6 o'clock, he has to have 5 o'clock shadow. And it had to be scheduled in a way that allowed makeup to do it. So that would be the first thing she'd look at it for John Hamm's beard.
Wow.
Ridiculous.
But that's an example of us thinking about other people. You should do anyway as well, not just makeup, but art department. You schedule the sets that have to be built towards the end of the schedule, etc. And if you can't, you give them a warning. This is going to play first up. What does that do to you?
Along those lines, when something changes or with communicating with people, Adam ingrained in my head when I started as the second and then Key about letting the art department know when anything changed as well. So it was something, you know, on a non-period show, you change something last minute, it's not as big a deal as, you know, art department needs to know, get them in. Oh, we're not going to that stage right away, or we're an hour early. Get them over there so they can get ready. So definitely watching each other's backs. And it's kind of ruined working on any other show for me since being on Mad Men, because I mean, I came up and it was one of my first shows in LA as an AD, and you go off to other shows and you don't have that person at the top like Matt who's pulling absolute best out of every crew member. It's not like that on every show, unfortunately.
So I know that the music that went with the episodes was also a big part of the show. Was a lot of that done in post, or did that also affect what was happening on set?
All the music was done in post. We had our tone meetings, and another thing a lot of shows don't do. In our tone meeting, it was the director, the writer of the episode, the first AD, the post-producer, the editor, and David Carbonero, who was the music supervisor and actually wrote most of the music. Also, our producer, Scott Hornbacher. And so the music was a big part. I know it didn't really happen on set. It was all in post. But in our tone meetings, Matt would talk about that. And that's why David was there. And they would talk about certain songs and how much we can get it for. Like, we actually had the Rolling Stones on an episode. That was probably like a 40-minute conversation. The one part where it did play was in the Zooby Zooby Zoo episode, which actually ended up getting released on iTunes and became very popular. David had a band and pre-recorded it with Jessica, and we found musicians that play the 4 instruments that we had there, brought them in, picked between multiple people, and got to know them to trust that they can do this, because you can't rehearse with them before. If you do that, you have to pay them as an AFM musician. So the way around that is you bring them in on the day a little bit early, and they sit in a corner all together with our music supervisor, and they rehearse and practice. And they did such a great job. If you really watch that episode, it really looks like they're playing those instruments. And we did something we never did on this show and gave them an extra money, because we were pretty impressed by the results and a little bit surprised. I'm actually surprised it came off so well.
I just remember everybody was really happy after we finished shooting that scene and how well it went and how efficient it was. And the shooting time is all the money saved there. I don't think it was a big issue to throw a couple extra $100 at these actors for doing such a great job.
For our show, it was because everything was very tight, but they did such a great job. And the other thing I remember from that scene is Robert Morris ate about 8 slices of cake.
And I think Jessica was pretty nervous going into that. I think there was some build up for her leading into it from the moment she read it in the script to the day we actually shot it. But she killed it naturally.
She did. And she looked amazing, hair makeup wise, and costume. It was a good show. It was a good episode. And again, another party scene where there was little side couplet conversations going on throughout the scene while that song was being played. It took us 4 days to shoot all the party scenes in that apartment.
It sounds like it could be very stressful. It sounds like it was hard work. But, Adam, you alluded earlier that people stayed, that most of the crew stayed through from season to season, stuck around for more of the same.
Yeah, there were some departments that had a changeover for the better. Every change was for the better. Nobody really left on their own. Some people left on their own because they're just like, I can't deal with anyone who said, who cares? No one's going to care. Eventually got weeded out, either by themselves or by Matt or Scott, because everybody cared. He cared. That's all that mattered, And there's a better way to get your point across except to say no one's going to care about this, because Matt cared. And the greatest thing about that too is in the concept meetings, our meetings were longer than most shows. Our concept meeting was never any less than 2 hours. Our production meetings were never any less than, 3 hours. Because that would be a place where we called it the production meeting instead of the production meeting, because the prop department, our prop master, would lay out all the props on a table. And as we were going through the scenes, Matt would look at them all. And, to say that Matt had ADD is being kind. He was very entertaining, and he was always up and looking at stuff. And, that meeting was basically our last chance with Matt for any questions before the train left the station.
That also with the props, that just the production meeting, although it was long and wasn't as important for every crew member as it was for the prop department, it just shows you too. It was just, that's the level of dedication and the preciseness that department needed to make sure everything was perfect.
Obviously, props had to work really hard with that kind of detail straight through. Any other departments that you think an unusual shout out to as far as what was called of them?
Well,
versus
costumes, obviously. Costumes,
Yeah, finding all the clothes for everybody. Plus Janie designed most of the cast clothes, which were just amazing. But also she did it in a way that was also very production friendly. The background, if you really watch the episodes now, if a show had 4 script days, the background for The Office would have 2 changes. Day 1 and day 3, day 2 and day 4 were the same. She kept it simple, but she had such a great palette for everything that when you're watching it, you don't really notice that. And that was all Janie Bryant, who was the costume designer. And her team was just amazing too. And there were certain costumes that some of these actresses had to literally be sewn into and couldn't do that until we were ready to shoot, and they couldn't sit down until we were done filming.
Do you special high chairs? What do? You have a couple of production assistants just to lean on? How do you accommodate something like that on these 14-hour days?
They used a high director's chair, and they would literally lean on it, and that would be their sitting. And they would everyone would take the heels off. As soon as you'd say, "All right, check the gate," heels off.
Well, tell me more about the cast in general. What was it like working with this crew of folks throughout these seasons? Basically, people are there for a very long time. Some folks left after a couple of seasons, and obviously some new folks came in, but it's a pretty solid core group and definitely an ensemble piece, even with Don Draper at the center of it.
So I ran first team on season 2, and I'll just tell a little story that John Hamm told me one night we were hanging out at base camp. He said that he was on this movie called We Were Soldiers, and he was one of the soldiers that was like always on in the movie with Mel Gibson. He was part of Mel Gibson's team. And he said, I don't know, there were like 10 or 15 of them, and they didn't really have lines. They were like featured extras, but they were part of the group of soldiers. And he said that Mel Gibson treated them so well, and like they were part of the team. And he also said, Mel Gibson was number one. Of course, he would show up on time. He knew all his lines. He was ready to go. He was always there, and he set the example for the rest of the cast, and everybody followed his lead. And that's what John said. He looked to Mel and how he acted on his movie when he was put in this position on Mad Men, and I'd say he pulled it off just the way he wanted to. I mean, John was always there, knew his lines, the cast on down. I mean, it was such a good group. Nobody had big egos. Everybody loved each other, at least from my perspective. I mean, Lana was in the makeup trailer with them, closed doors. She might know differently, but I season 2, I had a great time hanging out with everybody. We had a table at base camp. We put in fake grass. We played cards, backgammon. I mean, it was a really, really nice family. And I think also what might have lended itself was the fact that everybody was kind of a relatively unknown and came up together on the show, and everybody kind of found success together, which is always a good thing.
They were so prepared, the regular cast, that if a day player came in and didn't know their lines and started forgetting their lines, they would literally look to that person and go, "Really?" That was their line to them. Either Vincent would do it, or John Hamm would do it, Vincent Kartheiser or John Hamm, or John Slattery. They would look at him and go, "Really?" And we would, as a second AD, and Eric too, we would express that to everybody when we met them, like, "Hey, just so you know, everyone knows their lines here," so that to make sure that people came in, because there was one or two sometimes that didn't, and it was quite painful, and I would feel sorry for them, because the regular cast were not they were vicious, and rightfully so.
And there was no improvising either on set. You had to know your lines, word for word, line for line. You said what was on the paper.
Yes, and you didn't change anything. Also, sometimes there was a couple actors that were recast after a table read. Matt he knew what he wanted, and if the person wasn't going to deliver it, they paid them off and hired somebody else.
Now, what about in later seasons when you start bringing in actors with resumes? Think of Harry Hamlin, for example. How do they fit into a cast that is so integrated, become a part of that?
Everyone read for Matt. Everybody. It didn't matter who you were. And some actors that didn't want to read, he didn't cast them. So even who played Megan's mom?
Julia Ormond.
Yeah, Julia Ormond. She auditioned as well. Everyone read for him. And that's how Matt knew they would fit into the show. Personality-wise, not everybody fit in. There was one character who I'm not going to mention, so we don't get any names, but Eric knows who this person is, and you do too. And he looked at me after the read-through, and he said, because on the read-throughs, the first ADs would read the stage directions, which were also like the most stress, most anxiety I've ever had on that show, because if you mispronounced something or didn't do something, Matt was literally right there, and I could feel his eyes burning into me, and I would literally sweat. But he turned to me and said, "I apologize." And I said, "What are you sorry for?" He said, sometimes if you want a character to be annoying, you have to hire an annoying actor. And he was dead right about this person. And Eric knows what I'm talking about.
All I'm going to say is it was like we had to back up the water truck to the stage. They drank so much water I've never seen anything like it. It was constantly water, please, water, please.
The PAs ended up putting like a case of water by her chair.
Yeah, exactly. And it was not it's not a series regular. Not a series regular.
What about in the makeup trailer? How did they fit?
Listen, like I said, at the beginning we had like a little table and grass outside. By season 7, we had like a 2-story deck with a fire pit and like a game table, because like we would hang out there so much, like people that weren't even shooting would come and hang out at base camp. Like it was like Friday night. We'd sometimes see the sun come up. We would wrap at midnight, but we would stay there till and we would like hang out on the weekends. Like we were like, we spent a lot of time together. And I think it's like, I don't think anybody intentionally ever wanted to be rude or like elitist, but it's like a thing where it's like when you're like such a tight group and you have a rhythm, and then it's like somebody new comes in, it's almost just like kind of you can't sit with us, not because it just is like you're the new kid, it's just how it works. But like then there's some people like when Jay Ferguson came in, like he just like had no concept of like, you're not welcome here. So he just would like pull up a chair and be like, I brought dominoes, we're going to play this game. And we were just like, hey buddy. But then of course, like he became like the mascot, So like people like that just sort of moved in and like took over. And then, but there wasn't any like fighting or drama really. It just was like, we were all super tight, like us, the hair department and the cast and like these guys. And we spent a lot of time together. And I'm sure, a lot of people have told me, I've gone on to work with some, other actors that weren't, that were on the show, but not often, like maybe 3 episodes a season. They were like, it felt like the most unfriendly place I ever, I was scared to like walk around that corner where the base camp was, because everybody was having a good time. But if you would sit there, you were made to feel super uncomfortable, which was never like anyone's intention. It's just, we spent like 18 hours a day together, it's like,
it's more of like, because I've spent many nights there. If you're going to come around that corner and sit down, have something to say. Get involved.
Right. You
couldn't just come and sit there and not say anything, because that's what would make you feel uncomfortable. And if you had something to say, you were in like with people that have been together for so many hours for a week for so many years.
And like we said, we would only shoot 5 months, but we literally still hung out all the time and kind of still do. I mean, we still all see each other a lot, and like holidays, birthdays, like we're always all together. So, it was just a tough crowd, but like not in like a nasty way, just in like you better get it. It's like a big family, if you're the quiet one, you're just going to be left behind. You got to like be loud and get in there, or else you're ignored.
I equated it to like the double jumping rope, how you have to jump in there and start going, or else the ropes, you get caught. So it was sort of like that. And some of the day players, that even some of them that only came for a little bit, they made it in. They would fit right in and have a great time. And some of them just, stayed in a corner and read a book.
Or drank a lot of water.
Right.
Whatever they need to get, whatever they need.
And, if you go to LA Center right now where our base camp was, I can't believe we actually built this deck and they tore it down. But on the last day, we carved our names our initials into a tree. Uh-huh. And that is still there.
Yeah, it's still there. I just went, because I also work on Glow and we shoot it there. So I would go see the tree with all our initials on it. Pretty cool.
It was really, Matt, some people that would come in and out for an episode crew-wise would say, you all have Stockholm Syndrome. But, we fell in love with our captor. But it was more of a family. They always called us collaborators. And that's what I loved about that show. It was the first show that, as a first AD, that I had direct access to this showrunner who would tell me, you make sure this and make sure that, and make sure this director does this. We were collaborators. I'll never forget season 2 or 1 or 2. We're sitting in a room, and we're 100,000 over. What could we do about it? And it wasn't like to shame people into bringing their budget down. It's like, what could we do? And my one contribution was in where Don's brother Adam hangs himself. Before he hangs himself, he mails a letter. And in the script, he goes to the post office. And where we were going to shoot it is actually the same location we shot the Jaguar dealership, but we were going to turn that into a post office, and it was going to cost tens of thousands of dollars to do it. And we shot his hotel room in the Barclay Hotel downtown before the makeover that it got. It was really a seedy place. And my suggestion was, I remember my grandma telling me stories that hotels used to basically be post offices, and you can go in there and mail letters and stuff like that. And, Dan Bishop said, yeah, that's correct. And I said, isn't the lobby of the Barclay period correct? And Dan said, yeah. And we pitched that idea to Matt. Could he just go downstairs and give the letter to the hotel clerk? And that stayed in, and that cut out a location and dressing and a move and all of that stuff. And that's sort of the way we operated on that show. He challenged us too. He's like, do your research, prove me wrong. And there were some occasions where he was proven wrong by the prop department, by hair and makeup. For us as background, like when Betty went to go looking for the violin, she went to St. Mark's Street. I Googled St. Mark's with the date, pictures came up, and I remember I saw like two nurses walking by, a guy holding a TV, and I would show these pictures and be like, this is what I was thinking for the background for that. He'd be like, I love it. And that's literally what we did. Do you remember when it was snowing and the guy walking with the TV and we had the two nurse cross? You were the second.
Yeah, I'll never forget the guy with the TV. He loved carrying that thing back and forth.
Is there a special bump for carrying TV that you give somebody on their voucher?
Only if he brought it himself.
Well, talking about how these sort of conditions create what I think you'd argue is pretty insular crew and cast working together. Talk to me a little bit about things that were going on outside the show, starting with, as you mentioned, the show gets more and more popular. Product placement. I've read some stuff about a couple of key things. And like I said, Heineken was in season 2 was a big part, and Unilever in one of the later seasons. I've also read that Matt wasn't really happy with all of that went, but I'm curious about how that might have affected things on set, if at any point, either things coming in or the sense of what was going on outside the show.
Heineken was the only thing they made a deal with, and they paid for our wrap party season 2. And Matt hated the whole experience of having a advertiser have a say in what you're doing, because they're paying a lot of money. So of course they're going to have a say. And that was the last time he did that. Every product we used, Jaguar, Coca-Cola, they had no idea we were doing it. And no one got sued. It's amazing. Every other show you go on, they talk about clearance and all of that stuff. But on that show, no, he did not tell anybody anything because he did not want them to have a say. So the only product that I know of was Heineken for season 2. And that was it.
And what about in general, the sense as there was a public discussion about the show, and there's a controversy that while we're highlighting the social challenges of the 60s and the racism, the sexism, and the homophobia, the show is also in some level perhaps glamorizing some of the bad behavior, the drinking and the womanizing. Again, as later seasons go on, some of these behaviors start to catch up with some of the cast, but certainly there was a huge public debate around the time about what the show is trying to do. And I'm curious, again, whether you feel that or you can ignore all that when you're on a show this tight.
I would think you can ignore it because the show was so successful and everybody was so proud of what they were doing.
I don't think any of it was glamorized. I think it is what it is. And the only way you learn from bad behavior is to see people doing it. So to try to rewrite history like some shows do, that they don't let cigarettes on a show because it promotes bad behavior. But if you watch Mad Men, you see what these cigarettes did to these people and what it did to their faces. And Betty got cancer. And I don't think we glamorized anything. I think we've shined a spotlight on all of that stuff.
It was also one of the reasons why the show was popular, though, too. If you talk to anybody out there, it's like, I love all this smoking and drinking at work. I mean, people love to see it, you know. But you're right, we didn't glamorize it. I think the audiences took to it because they're not used to seeing that on
it was
TV.
also,
and also people that were working in that time were like, yeah, that's what it was.
right.
Like, it wasn't like we made that up.
And people were more like, I can't believe we behaved that way. You know, the occasion to walk into somebody, you know, you would just walk into somebody's office to have a drink. There was no occasion,
Yeah.
you know, and that's why every time Don went to Roger's office or Roger went to Don's, the first place they go is to the bar.
What about the smoking in the doctor's office?
Right.
Yeah.
Now the cast, the real smokers would smoke those fake cigarettes all day long, and then you say check the gate, and they'd go outside and smoke a real one.
Obviously, on set, you're not using real cigarettes, using the herbals that don't. So no one else is suffering the secondhand smoke on set.
Well,
they
no.
almost smell worse.
Yeah. But they also, all the air conditioning vents in the sets all had box fans on them. And when we cut and they turned the lights off, the sound guy had a switch to take all the smoke and blow it out. Otherwise, we would have all turned green. And there were some smokers who, when they couldn't leave the set, that were crew members, they would smoke a fake cigarette.
Well, I want to spend a little bit more time talking about that final season. So the final season comes in 2 parts. There's 7 episodes that are the first part and then a second 7, but it's released a year apart. Did you film them as 2 separate seasons, or did you film all 14 of those episodes in a row and just, we're talking about release dates that had them so far apart?
We took 2, it was like 8 weeks, right? Between
I think 6 weeks.
6 weeks off in between the first block and second block.
But we filmed it as one big season. And think about that. A year went by and there was nothing released from that last season, because every production meeting and every concept meeting and every read through, Matt beat into our head the value of the show is no one knowing what's going on. And he told every actor, don't put it on your IMDb page. We will promote you once the show airs. The value in this is keeping it secret. And it got a little, you know, you bring up the point, like what happened when it got more popular. When it got more popular, the secrecy started more. We started having paparazzi meetings, because now for the first time in season 5, we started getting paparazzi. That didn't happen to us because nobody cared about the show. So now we have to have these meetings because Matt didn't like seeing pictures of the guest stars in costume, and then people tried to figure out what was going to go on. So we would have to have them loaded up in a van with dark windows, and if they were going to walk to set, we had umbrellas and stuff like that. A few of them, like John Hamm, was like, I don't give an F. And
yeah, but like when we did Fat Betty, they were like climbing the walls at LA Center to photograph her.
Right.
And they got pictures of her in her fat makeup before. The only thing that saved us was that she was pregnant. So
they assumed
they
that
just assumed
Betty
she was pregnant and not that we had made her that we had made her fat.
And the other thing too is that, you know, our call sheets used to say Mad Men on them. And then season 5, we switched to You Are Okay, which was the LLC, because that was a line from the pilot when he described advertising. You know, he basically said, you know, advertising wants to make people feel like they are okay. And they use that. Now, all of our call sheets said You Are Okay. All of our synopses could not say Don and Peggy talk about this. We had to basically write something that didn't give away the story. So I would just pull lines out from the script. So whatever was the most memorable line of the scene, I would put that as my synopses. The crew would be like confused.
And then also at the end, when we went to Big Sur, we went there filming under a fake commercial. Like they even made us T-shirts,
right,
for the fake commercial that we were filming. Like everybody was in like a fake. It was so ridiculous.
Right. The people didn't know we were in Hawaii until we were there. And then the first day we started filming there, that's when everybody knew we were there, because they kept it really, really secret.
Adam, on your call sheets, when you did that with the synopsis, was that a directive?
Yes.
That you were told to do that?
Not to pull the lines from the script. The directive was there can't be any story in those synopses. You know, every writer likes to see their their words.
Yeah.
You know, if a writer would direct an episode, it would be just lips moving. So my idea was I would pick lines from the script that were the most memorable, and Matt liked that. There was one episode that was about, I forgot what author, and I somehow tied it into all of the synopses, and Matt saw that and commented on it. He's the only one that would get it, and that's why I did it. But it was also just a game for me to see, like, hey, see if he's really paying attention. And he was. We would start every concept meeting with, here's what I didn't like about the background from the last episode. And he would be talking to the ADs not responsible for it.
Yeah.
Because the other team is the ones who had said it, but you were planning for the next
Right.
episode, the one at
So
the
I'd be
odd one.
like, I'll let them know about that.
Well, probably lesson learned on both sides. Talk more about that last season. You talked about going to Big Sur. You talked about Don Draper's road trip. Now things are getting a lot bigger. You have maybe fewer cast, and you're stepping away from the offices, but that's all where you had very established scenes and processes. But all of this is new.
Yeah, we had to find new locations. He went on a road trip across the country, so we started filming in these remote parts of California to find like the little hotel that he would stayed at in 1960, which now is like a gimmicky place in California because it's period correct, and but it's far out there because LA is so overbuilt. And also when we that fast food place, the Real Burger Chef, we actually went to a burger chef that was just sitting there empty and recreated it. We did some pretty crazy stuff.
We did that same thing with Howard Johnson's as well. We went a little inland from LA, I think, if I can remember correctly, to find an old Howard Johnson's building to shoot our exteriors at. You're not going to just go find some building and shoot a Howard Johnson's because it had such a unique, distinct look. We went to an actual old Howard Johnson's and found the one to shoot at, painted it all up nice, and made it look like it was brand new.
So, guys, with the challenges of this last season, tell me also what it's like to start a season knowing that it's basically going to wrap up a show, particularly one that you've been worked on this long with these group of folks. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you knew from the beginning that season 7 was going to be the end.
Yeah. Oh, from the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
Of season,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was bittersweet, to be honest, in the beginning, I don't think any of us really thought about it because we had to make another season of this show. We know how hard it is. And so we sort of focused on that. But towards when we came back for the second half, it definitely was, bittersweet.
I don't know. I remember the first, because, we had so many, like he said, so many meetings and we all had to go. I remember the first concept meeting of season 7, like Matt and Scott both made a speech, like, this is our last first premiere. And like everybody was crying. They were crying. We all were crying. It was like, and we had everything started that way. Like, this is our last first day and our last gallery shoot and our last, and it was like, we just kind of all, I know as far as like myself and the cast, and we were just like, we're just going to have to tell our families that for the next, 7 months, like they're never going to, because we're only going to be together. And we really were like, it was like, I think it started off that way. Everybody, this is our last, our last whatever. I don't know, our last second episode, our last production meeting. It could.
Yeah, there was a lot of lasts. There was a lot of lasts. The one thing I remember from that season, the gift they gave us, which is something I cherish, they gave us a yearbook. And they broke up the crew as freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors. Those of the crew that were there from episode 1, not the pilot, but episode 1, season 1, were seniors. And then, but judging by how many years you were on the show, you were then a junior, sophomore, or freshman. And we actually took photos. They did clubs like you do in a yearbook, like the sound club and the catering club, and every department took pictures together. And they did what do you call those things where you give out the awards? The superlatives.
Yeah.
I won loudest. Of course, two of the ADs won loudest and cutest couple with me and Chris Sposa, the boom operator.
Very nice.
Because we were inseparable, because he was hilarious and we both were frustrated by the same things. And that was such a great way to wrap up that show. They asked the entire crew to send pictures because we all took pictures while we were shooting the show. And it really is just this, every once in a while, I leave it in my office now, and I love when people come in and look through it, and I get to sit there and go through all those memories again.
And also, like, they gave it to us 2 weeks before we wrapped, so we could go around and get everyone to sign it. So
you sign.
Yeah. So everybody.
Perfect.
It's some of like it's the sweetest thing.
Yeah.
I think that, it's the best.
But
best gift ever.
That's a best gift. And then best actor gift was John Hamm gave to, I think, people that were there from season 1, a bar of gold in a fancy wallet, some name brand wallet that someone said, yeah, that's fancy. And a note that basically said he cherishes this time and these memories as much as that bar of gold. And for us to do that, and this is to remind you to do that. And that to me was one of the sweetest things ever, because it wasn't just a gift or a really expensive gift, to be honest, because gold has gone up since then. But it just
the gift
was
that
like,
keeps giving.
Yeah, it was just like, he really wanted to tell us to remember these times. And as John Slattery said, this show will be on all of our epitaphs. Worked on Mad Men.
Well, it sounds like quite an experience you had, guys, and I really appreciate you coming on the show today to share about it. Thanks so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
Listeners, if you'd like to tell me what you thought of the episode, you can send email to skid, S-K-I-D, at belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. I also appreciate your feedback via iTunes, where I review your ratings and comments, and Facebook, where I post photos and other behind-the-scenes materials at Podcast Below the Line. Please do rate us and tell your friends. It helps new listeners find the show. For updates and other info, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. On both platforms, search for Pod Below the Line. Thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. And whether you're a longtime listener or just starting with us now, thanks for joining us today for the kickoff of Season 3. We'll drop another episode next week. Adam, I want you to tell me a little bit about your background scene in the final episode. With all the pressure you've talked about on putting on this show, I noticed it when I was watching earlier today. You walk out of a conference room. You know the scene I'm talking about?
Matt never liked that. There's only 2 instances in the show where crew names were there, and they were done without him really recognizing it. He didn't like it. Hornbacher and Sons was on a moving truck, and when you flash back to where Don was working at the gas station, it was Bishop's gas station, which was Dan Bishop, our production designer. But for the last episode, he got sort of, sentimental. And any crew member that was there from the beginning, there was a few of us that he asked if we wanted to be extras in the show. And so in that scene, it was me and Semi Chellis, who was the writer of the previous episode, and she ran the room with Matt for season 7. We had just finished filming our episode, and he asked us both to be in the scene, and we did it. And I'll be honest with you, it was nerve-wracking because it's hard. I still haven't watched it because it was so nerve-wracking that I don't even want to see it. And all the other actors are just so good, but when you're standing there with the camera pointing at you, Matt had to come talk to me and relax me, and then I did what he wanted. But it was really nerve-wracking, I have to be honest.
Yeah, I don't even remember. You do a little bit where you push your glasses up right as you're stepping out. Were you directed on that, or were you feeling creatively improvisational, as you would say?
I did that because of his direction. It was more, that was a FU to her, and he told me to drop my shoulders to look defeated. But it was hard. I actually have a picture of us, Peggy, Don, I would say Elisabeth, John, Matt, me, and Semi, right after we shot that scene. Because that was literally the last time I was on the set. until the very last day when we have the entire crew came back and we have a picture where you can't see even our faces because there's so many people. But that was the last time I came back, and we stayed, I think, till 6 a.m. at base camp.
That's insane.
I think that's when we carved the initials in the tree too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
All those office bars, it was going to be the last time you needed any of them. So finish up what's ever there.
No alcohol went wasted on that set. That's for sure.
Scott had a bar, Matt had a bar, Dan had a bar, the coordinator, John Hampian, had a bar. There was wine and cheese Fridays at the art department every Friday. Nobody was a drunk, but we, when work was done, everybody, it wasn't far to go to celebrate, or especially after a hard episode or
a Tuesday.
I'm trying not to say that there was a lot of drinking on this show.